Better Life Media, America's leading source for life improvement, presents Tom Peters. Reimagine. Business excellence in a disruptive age.
Well, a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Reimagine. Reimagine to me is a very big word. It's the title of my most recent book. And actually, I came up with the title, stealing it like most things in life, about 2 years ago, not right after, but several months after 9/11. There was a special edition of the Sunday Times Magazine, New York Sunday Times Magazine, about the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan. And it said, don't rebuild, reimagine. And to me, the difference is, maybe it's subtle, but to me it's subtle like a freight train coming at you at 100 miles an hour. The reimagination imperative, a passion for passion. Writing a book is a walk in the park. Choosing the epigraph for a book is difficult. You got to find 10 words, written or spoken by somebody else, that perfectly capture what you've been thinking about for the last 5 years. And I was happy with this pair. Uncertainty is the only thing to be sure of. Anthony Mew, head of investment in Asia, Citigroup Asset Management. My favorite of the lot, however, is this second one from the recently retired Chief of Staff of the United States Army, Eric Shinseki. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And once again, I think it is an accurate and a practical statement. Context, a perfect storm. It is a perfect storm. Jobs, technology, globalization, and security, everything is up for grabs. I am not kidding. I am not using speaker's hyperbole. There are no experts. The fabulous news for all of us is there are no experts. They're winging it in the Defense Department. They're winging it in the corporate boardrooms. And all of us are winging it with our careers. And so fundamentally, the secret, which I'll talk about, is, and my old man said to me 40 years ago, don't just stand there, do something. Jobs. Headlines like this have almost become commonplace. University of California, Berkeley study last November, 14 million service jobs are in danger of being shipped offshore. I found this just 2 days ago in the New York Times from the columnist and op-ed writer Tom Friedman, and I loved it even though it terrifies me. When I was growing up, my parents used to say to me, finish your dinner. People in China are starving. I, by contrast, find myself wanting to say to my daughters, finish your homework. People in China and India are starving for your job. And I note the absence of laughter for the appropriate reasons. And if it's not offshoring, it's the technology. Every one of us in this room, including myself, can be replaced by a $299.95 microprocessor. Jeffrey Immelt took over as Chief Executive Officer of General Electric about 2 years ago. First public interview he gave, he said 75% of admin, back office, finance jobs at GE, a 350,000-person company, will be digitalized, which is a genteel word for disappeared, over the course of the next 36 months. Now, I'd been running around the country saying that 75 to 95% of white-collar jobs would, in fact, be reconfigured beyond recognition or disappear in 15 years, and they called me a lunatic, but I'm only a consultant. Immelt's in the real world is the boss of GE, and he says the same thing, only he says 36 months. And then the world of security. Robert Cooper is an advisor to Tony Blair, and Mr. Cooper said in an interesting book called The Breaking of Nations, this is a dangerous world and it is going to become more dangerous. We may not be interested in chaos, but chaos is interested in us. Now, why in the midst of this 1-hour presentation have I devoted the first 6 or 7 minutes to background? Because in my opinion, you can't talk about the practical stuff unless you talk about the context in which it is embedded. This is not your father's world. Heaven alone knows it's not my father's world. My father worked for 41 years for the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. Same building, same floor, same office, 41 years in a row. He thought I was a lunatic when I took my second job at about the age of 30. And now, fundamentally, if you stay on a job more than 3 years, they say, what, she ain't got no entrepreneurial spirit? What's wrong with her? Biases and purposes. I usually have too many slides, and so I never get around to the conclusion, so I've come to the conclusion that I need to put the conclusion first. Anytime a speaker, particularly an ancient and elderly one like myself, comes to talk to any group of human beings, the reality is we are not unbiased researchers and observers. We are carrying tons of biases. And this is mine, as spoken by somebody else. The first reviewer of my new book last October, Fast Company magazine, said, "In Tom's world, it's always better to try a swan dive and deliver a colossal belly flop than to step timidly off the board while holding your nose." Fundamentally, I have spent 3.5 decades of my life devoted to one and only one idea, and that idea is business is not drab, dry, dreary, by the numbers. It is energetic, it's about passion, it's about creativity, it's about service, it's about growth, and so on and so forth. And the numbers are fine. I love profit. I don't even love profit, I love obscene profit. Because if profit is obscene, guess what you can do? Hire the world's most fantastic people and take the most extraordinary and interesting risks known to humankind. Now, you've seen this on T-shirts, you've seen it on posters, you've seen it on cards in stores, and I don't care if you've seen it 18,000 times. This is 18,001, because it deserves to be repeated. Michelangelo, the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and that we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. It is a failure of imagination that trips most of us up, not a failure to reach some finish line. Now look, I'm average at a lot of things, and I'm below average at a lot of things, okay? But I do not wake up in the morning and say to my wife or somebody like that, "Have an average day, honey." I mean, the notion of aspiring to an average day, whether you are a housekeeper or a software designer or a chief financial officer, makes me want to barf. You know, the aspiration of excellence will not always be achieved, but we know darn well it will not be achieved if we don't aspire to do a heck of a lot more than we had aimed to do. This was a pretentious comment that I put on the back cover of the book, and yet I believe it. It is the foremost task and responsibility of our generation to reimagine our enterprises, public and private, and reimagine our careers as well. Okay, a lot of stuff I want to talk about. A bias for action is number one. A bias for action was the number one point in Search of Excellence in 1982. We made a lot of mistakes in that book, but this was not one of them. What Bob Waterman and I said in 1982, and given the pace of change today, it's even more true today, is we said the number one trouble with enterprises, small or large, is too much talk, too little do. Now, as you know, we have this one remarkable institution in the United States, the ultimate oxymoron, a profitable airline. It's called Southwest. Herb Kelleher, the chief executive officer of Southwest, and I agree on the essence of a strategic plan. And I love these words of Herb's. We have a strategic plan. It's called doing things. And literally, as I said, it was number one on my list 22 years ago. It's number one on my list today. Fail, forward, fast. No screw-ups, no learning. It's as simple as that. No fast screw-ups, no fast learning, no big screw-ups, no big learning. Now, in my major slide deck at my website, there's some 1,200 slides. By definition, one of them has got to be my favorite. And this next one is my favorite of the 1,200, even though I'm using it relatively early in the presentation. Comes from a Sydney, Australia exec, an extremely successful one at that, who said that he owed most of his business success to a simple 6-word philosophy: reward excellent failures, punish mediocre successes. And now I think this is a great quote, but my goal relative to you is not to have you say, "Nice quote, Tom," but to take it literally seriously. Weird wins. I trained Jim Collins when he was a young boy. I appreciate Jim Collins as a researcher. It's just unfortunate that there's not a single word in any of Jim Collins' books that I agree with. Jim believes that leaders should be calm and quiet. I believe that leaders should be noisy and obnoxious. I was flying over to England, and I was reading the Financial Times of London. And Jim had just been interviewed on the Good to Great book, and he said, "Quiet, workmanlike, stoic leaders bring about the big transformations." Remember I said flying to London? Now, unfortunately, I haven't got a slide that shows the copy of the newspaper and my hand scratching in the margins, because I read this, and right next to it in the article I wrote, Wellington, Nelson, Disraeli, Churchill, Montgomery, and Thatcher. If there is one thing that you can say about these people is they weren't quiet, they weren't humble, and they sure as hell weren't stoic, but they did change the world. So that leads to my absurd point. I came to the conclusion a while back, innovation is actually easy, not hard. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean something very simple. Please pay attention. Hang out with weird, and thou shalt become more weird. Hang out with dull, and thou shalt become more dull. It's as simple as that. Now, I had this brilliant flash, and I thought it was one of the most original things I had ever thought in my entire life, which, of course, is why I was a little bit nonplussed when I discovered that somebody had already written a book about it 5 years before. Wayne Birkin wrote the book. It was called Wide Angle Vision. He said the people who will lead us to the promised land are disgruntled customers, off-the-scope competitors, rogue employees, and fringe suppliers. It's not the main topic of my speech, but I hate benchmarking. Benchmarking is stupid. Why is it stupid? Because we pick the current industry leader, and then we launch a 5-year program, the goal of which is to be as good as whoever was best 5 years ago, 5 years from now. Which to me is not exactly an Olympian aspiration. As two professors said in the Financial Times article a while back, to grow, companies need to break out of a vicious cycle of competitive benchmarking and imitation. I want you to download this slide from my website and use it as a screensaver. We will read this. I'm almost tempted to say read it in unison. This is an essay about what it takes to create and sell something remarkable. It is a plea for originality, passion, guts, and daring. You cannot be remarkable by following someone else who's remarkable, as true for a career as it is for a restaurant or for a giant company. One way to figure out a theory is to look at what's working in the real world and determine what the successes have in common. But what could the Four Seasons and Motel 6 possibly have in common? Or Neiman Marcus and Walmart? Or Nokia bringing out new hardware every 30 days or so, and Nintendo marketing the same Game Boy 14 years in a row? It's like trying to drive looking in the rearview mirror. The thing that all these companies have in common is they have nothing in common. They are outliers. They're on the fringes. Super fast or super slow, very exclusive or very cheap, extremely big or extremely small. The reason it's so hard to follow the leader is this. The leader is the leader precisely because he did something remarkable, and that remarkable thing is now taken, so it's no longer remarkable when you do it. Now, it's a brilliant statement, and it requires a little bit of thought, so download it and look at it at your leisure in a quiet place.